Today's story is none other than Disney's first computer-generated princess film, Tangled. The original Rapunzel tale is essentially a bedtime story popularized by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, so you know it'll be a dark one. After 5 Disney Dark Secrets videos, this is our first time covering a tale from the Brothers Grimm. So hold on to your stomachs. I'm Frank with Channel Frederator, and this is Disney's Dark Secrets in Tangled. It's time to make the clock reverse and bring back the Grimm's version of the long, blonde, dangerous hair. The history of Rapunzel. Executive producer Glenn Keane originally wanted the film to be darker than most Disney films are, but the film ended up going in quite a different direction, and is pretty delightful, even before the Brothers Grimm told the tale. There were quite a few others who explored the idea of long-haired maidens locked in a tall tower. The first known version came in 1634, when Giambattista Basile penned Petronella. In this version, no one really suffered. Then, in 1697, Charlotte Rose Commande La Fosse rewrote the story and named the maiden Presinit. She added some romantic tension, but still opted for a painless ending. The Brothers Grimm version was actually their adaptation of Friedrich Schultz's Kleine Roman from 1790, which they felt could benefit from a little more brutal oomph. What you should know is that several years later, Wilhelm rewrote the version that he and his brother worked on. The overall structure stayed the same, but several details were changed, such as changing Frau Gothel, same name as Disney's mother figure, into an evil sorceress, instead of keeping her as a fairy. And since it's more dramatic, we'll be going with the evil sorceress witch angle throughout this retelling. As we tell the story, we'll get into some of those differences and why they happened. Now, let's get on with it. Rapunzel is a vegetable. This is the story of a girl named Rapunzel, and it starts with pregnancy cravings. Once upon a time, a regular man and woman, not a king and queen of Corona, as Disney might say, kept trying to have a child. Eventually, they were finally able to get pregnant. However, with pregnancy came the munchies. Fortunately for the wife, there was a beautiful garden next door. Unfortunately, their neighbor was an evil witch. Which, by the way, we don't remember Mother Gothel being Queen Ariana's and King Frederic's next-door neighbor, unless you count the tower to be next door to their kingdom. Nor was she really a witch. Anyway, we digress. So, the wife asked her husband to go fetch her some ridiculous-looking Rapunzel, which is a type of salad plant. That's right, Rapunzel is edible. While we never get into why the princess has such a strange-sounding name in the Disney flick,
Gesundheit.
It has quite a logical explanation in the Grimm version. She was named after her mother's appetite. Imagine if you were named Peanut Butter Pickle. Yikes. Now, the reason her husband was willing to steal the veggie for her wasn't just because he was a loving sweetheart. Her cravings made her sick, really sick. She was running out of time, and that's when people usually start to look for a miracle. That sounds awful familiar. And as you know, in this case, that miracle wasn't a magic golden flower that grew from a drop of golden sunlight, just like in Tangled. It was just a leafy green. Thankfully, the Rapunzel healed his wife, much like the flower healed his queen. But then the illness struck again, unlike in Disney's version in the story. Once more, the husband went to the garden, but this time, he came face to face with the angry witch. As she was about to curse him, he explained that the Rapunzel was the only thing that could cure his pregnant wife. Understanding the situation, the sorceress struck a deal with him. He could take all the Rapunzel he wanted, but she would get to keep their child. Sounds like a good deal to me, except not really. So, yeah, in the original version, baby Rapunzel was essentially traded for groceries and not kidnapped by Gothel because she could restore her youth via magical song and hair. In fact, there's sort of no magic in the original story at all. Let down your very, very long hair. In Tangled, Mother Gothel locks Rapunzel in the tower from day 1. In the Grimm's Rapunzel, she's only locked away at age 12. What happened in those 12 years before tower life? No idea. It's never touched upon at all. Here's what we know. Rapunzel grew up to become the most beautiful child under the sun. And yes, her hair is golden and long. Exactly 20 yards long, the Grimm brothers tell us, which is 60 feet. In Tangled, Rapunzel's hair is exactly 10 feet longer than that. But who's counting? As everyone is aware, in both versions, the tower has no door and no known staircase. It only has that single window at the top. Much like the Disney version, Rapunzel would help her foster mother into the tower by tying her hair on a window hook and pulling her up. This is where one of the most famous lines from the fairy tale, if not all fairy tales, comes from. Before being elevated via hair, for old Gothel would call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Nearly every child grew up knowing those words and how to say them. Disney even makes a nod to this phrase in its retelling. The phrase made its first appearance in a trailer, where Flynn Rider says part of it, "Let down your hair," before a bunch of hair crashes down on him. Sadly, this scene was cut from the movie. The first time we hear it in the film is when Gothel says, "Rapunzel, let down your hair." But without the second Rapunzel, it's just not the same. We actually do get to hear two Rapunzels later. When Flynn rushes to save Rapunzel, he says her name twice.
Rapunzel? Rapunzel, let down your hair!
Sure, the first one is technically a question, and the whole phrase isn't in the tone we normally recognize it by, but Disney did manage to squeeze it in there in its entirety. Sneaking behind Gothel's back. One day, a prince wanders into the woods and overhears Rapunzel singing from the tower. That's right, we said prince, not a handsome rogue thief escaping from the law. Sorry, Flynn Rider, man of our dreams, no place in this story for you. The prince becomes so enamored by Rapunzel that he comes by day after day after day to watch her. Sure, some people would call this stalkery, but in a fairy tale, it's romantic. Eventually, he sees Fool Gothel call upon Rapunzel with her signature phrase, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." He decides to trick Rapunzel into pulling him up later that night, rather than just break in like Flynn does. As it so happens, calling out to her works. He climbs up her hair into the tower, only to scare the hell out of her when she finds that she pulled up a male stranger. But after he begins to flirt, she softens up and takes a liking to him. In Disney's version, Rapunzel is also frightened when she first sees Flynn, so much so that she whams him with a frying pan. However, his flirting has no effect on her whatsoever. Looks like the smolder doesn't always work. This is the first case in the story where the two Grimm versions are significantly different. In the earlier version, Rapunzel and the prince agree on him visiting her every night, with no plans of her ever leaving the tower. It being the nighttime, they do some nighttime things. You know, they get it on. Whereas in the second Grimm version, the prince immediately asks Rapunzel to marry him, figuring that she met someone who values her. She says yes. Comparatively, as we see in Tangled the series, our Disney-fied Rapunzel doesn't even say yes to a proposal after having been with Eugene for quite a while. Woohoo! Modern female independence. Back to Grimm. To plan her escape from the tower, they agree that the prince will bring a piece of silk to her every night that they will use to make a ladder. While there are no mentions of any sexy time in this version, there are hints later that it does happen. Anyway, just like Gothel wasn't aware that Rapunzel met Flynn in the Disney film, though Rapunzel does actually leave the tower and go on a full adventure in the film, the witch in the Grimm version wasn't aware that her foster daughter and the prince were consorting. This is revealed to her in two ways. First version, Rapunzel complains that her clothes are growing tight. Surprise! She's pregnant. In the second version, she asked a really dumb question. Fool Gothel, tell me why it is that you are more difficult to pull up than is the young prince, who will be arriving any moment now. Yeah, we told you it was dumb. Princess Rapunzel of Corona would never ask a question that ridiculous. As you can expect, the evil witch was not happy at all. Here's what she did. Wilderness, blindness, and twins. Apart from needing it to come in and out of the tower, Gothel has no need for Rapunzel's long hair in the Grimm's version. So she's the one who ends up cutting it off. And just like that, Flynn Rider's historic moment is gone. But that itself wasn't enough for Gothel in the Grimm story. She hated having been lied to and no longer wants Rapunzel around. She takes her to the wilderness. In some translations, this is a swamp, desert, or the woods, and leaves her there to suffer and basically die. If this is what Gothel had planned for Rapunzel at the end of Tangled, we are extremely happy our heroine managed to get out safe. Isolation in a tower is one thing, but isolation in a brutal and terrifying climate is another. Not to mention that in both Grimm's versions, Rapunzel ended up giving birth to twins, who she had to take care of on her own. As for the prince, Gothel uses Rapunzel's hair to lure him back to the tower, much like she uses Rapunzel's hair to help Flynn get back into the tower towards the end of the film. She tells the prince that Rapunzel has perished, and he'll never see her again. Driven by grief, he throws himself out of the tower. That's right, it isn't Gothel that falls to her death, except the prince doesn't die. In that way, Flynn sort of gets the worst side of the coin, since he dies for a moment, but I'd take that over Grimm's version. You see, the prince doesn't die because he falls into a bush of thorns that stab into his eyes and blind him. Guess he isn't going to see the light. A happy ending. Now look, the brothers Grimm did occasionally like the bow tie stories with a cheerful ending. After the prince blindly stumbles through the wilderness for years, only eating grass. We do not recommend eating grass. He and Rapunzel are united. She begins to cry now that they are together again, and her tears fall into his eyes. Without having to sing, "Bring back what was mine," her tears bring back his sight. Kind of like how Blondie, the tangled Rapunzel, brought back Flynn's life with a single tear. Guess we lied. There was a little bit of magic in the Grimm version. Together, along with their twins, Rapunzel and the prince head off towards his kingdom, where they are reunited with his family. Kind of like how in Tangled, where they go to the kingdom of Corona and reunite Rapunzel with her birth parents, the king and queen. And they lived happily ever after. Of course, in this version, Gothel never perished, so it is possible she could return at any minute and destroy everything and everyone they love, but that doesn't actually happen. So maybe we shouldn't let our imagination run wild and ruin a perfectly happy ending. Themes: premarital relations versus dreams. If you didn't pick up on it, the story of Rapunzel is essentially the original Scarlet Letter, as told by the brothers Grimm. It's a horror story about sex and children, and why you shouldn't get pregnant out of wedlock. The reason Wilhelm made the changes he did was to remove the out-of-wedlock portion of the thematic tones. At the time, society was a bit more reserved, and the original take on Rapunzel was too saucy. Even though it acted as a warning that basically stated that bad things would come to those who get pregnant in wrong ways, people didn't want to hear about it at all. Meanwhile, Disney keeps as far away from that theme as possible. Maybe people of the olden days would have liked this version as much as we do. By adding the endearing plot point of the floating lanterns, Disney made the story about flowing golden hair representing the idea to follow your dreams. It's best said in the exchange between Rapunzel and Flynn.
What if it's not everything I dreamed it would be?
It will be.
And what if it is? What do I do then?
Well, that's the good part, I guess. You get to go find a new dream.
So don't go locking yourself in a tower anytime soon, or a witch will cut your hair and blind your lover. Thanks for watching this video on the Disney dark secrets behind Tangled. We are no longer blind when it comes to seeing the true tale of Rapunzel. Did we miss any secrets? Which ones were the darkest? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below, and check out our other videos. Don't forget to subscribe to channel Frederator and click on the bell icon to become part of the notification squad. And remember, Frederator loves you.